Are we?
Okay, y'all, we're buzzing here. Yeah, we're this is yeah, I'm exploding with so much thoughts and ideas, and we're coming off of our last session and these 2 days, and we still have one more session after this, and this one's ours, so it's a much different vibe, but yeah, but we're super excited to have us here to be able to share with you, and we're excited about that. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, and we were just talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but this is our second time hosting a virtual retreat. And last year, Matt and I, we didn't have any sessions for ourselves. We did a vision board session, but it wasn't like a presentation. It was more of a like an accountability work session. And so we're really grateful to be here with you. And we've put together a presentation on values. And I know Matt's going to do a little bit more of an intro here, and then he'll pass it back to me. But
Yeah, it's not much of an intro. We actually realized right before this we didn't really introduce ourselves and don't really exactly know how, but I know that we're together. We are creators, gatherers, and connectors, and that's really, I think, how we identify ourselves together. And I know for myself, I came up in this world as a creative person, a designer, and I'm only recently in my life claiming a writer, and also an athlete. So I really enjoy those things and bring those things into everything I do. And Leslie, I don't know if you want to maybe say something about your own self, independent from me
yeah,
and our collective group.
yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of reflecting on how, as Matt says, like collectively, like the two of us were creators, gatherers, connectors. But individually, oh yeah, Christina said you're a designer, Matt. That's so cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's designed like all of our things, and he's a brilliant designer, I think. And but about me, I was just kind of noticing how like who and how we are together is also how I am individually. And even just looking at the human design that my profile,
Right.
my purpose as a stabilizer is to build and be a part of a community and to prepare the way for sharing and spreading ideas. And that's feels very relevant. But yeah, I think looking back on my life and just throughout, Matt and mine's time with Elemental, I've been a gatherer, like creating spaces for people, regardless of even knowing if I was doing it or not. And so and formally I had an event planning business. I planned weddings and did different things. And I had a much different, I'm really great at organization and logistics and details and things like that. But I don't know, I kind of came into my own in that space, being behind the scenes, supporting people and helping guide them not only on, planning the details of an event, but digging more into the purpose of the event and why they're doing it, and then creating something that's meaningful and something that people can feel. And that's, I think, what I strive to do. And ultimately, creating spaces where people can feel seen and heard and loved. So yeah.
And if I could say one other thing that's just coming to me, we didn't plan any of this necessarily, but I was thinking about myself as designer, and that was my vocation from a very young age, and I came to realize, I think later in life, as through a career in design, is that what I was doing in a lot of ways was helping people express themselves, right? And I think that Leslie too, as an event planner and her business, really that's what she was doing too. I think like good design and good event planning, is all about getting to the core, the heart, the soul of a person or an institution or whatever it is, and helping them express that in an authentic way. And I think that we're going to dive into that a little bit with Leslie, and I also love the basics. Like we have a really deep love of the basics, the very simple things, because the simple things can sometimes be the most powerful, and that's what we're kind of here to talk about today. Is the simplest of the simple things, I think, in some ways for us.
Which is kind of how Dr. Shauna ended on,
Mm.
kind of that third way being like the
Ah,
simple. easeful thing that can present itself.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say,
Um,
I'll say this too, right before we
mhm.
start. I think that I wanted to also just say right from the start that as elemental for us, we have a shared values for elemental. And since we're going to be doing a values presentation, our values for elemental are love and vision. And so we'll just kind of like set that tone, and then we'll talk a little bit more about values as we get in, and then our own personal ones. But I had
Yeah.
forgotten that we had them for our shared
Yeah.
values or love and
And
vision.
Christina said, simple is genius, and genius is simple. I love
Oh, wow,
that.
yeah.
I love that so much.
Oh,
So, thank you all for being here. And welcome to the Values as Superpowers session. So we wanted to start, it's been an incredibly beautiful 2 days, and we just wanted to start here by taking a few breaths together in community. So let's just take a moment and, wherever you are, just kind of noticing how you're sitting in your chair and just letting yourself ground there. Maybe I know we started our day, Margie, doing some of these shoulder rolls. So just like rolling your shoulders up and back and moving your head from side to side, whatever feels good to you. And for those of you who are listening later, aren't here with us, you can even pause this right now and take a little extra time if that feels good to you. We'll do a few deep breaths here. So let's go ahead and together take an inhale breath and exhale. And inhale and exhale. Last one, inhale, and hold this one at the top. And release, let it all go. Slowly opening your eyes, maybe rolling your head from side to side, shaking it out if you've got any extra energy.
yes, I do.
Yes, he does. So values as superpowers. We're going to start with, I'm going to do a little storytelling just from my perspective on how values came to be in my life and, the importance of them. And then we'll dive into going through a process that Matt and I have created and a workbook that we actually created on values. And I don't know if you all saw the values list that we sent out before this session. If you had a chance to look at it, that's great. And if you didn't, that's totally fine too.
And if you've done values work before,
Mm.
which is because this is a pretty fundamental thing, we find that the fundamentals are always worth coming back to over and over again. So if you've done it before, this is a good opportunity maybe to redefine or rethink, and we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah. And one of the things we'll hit on too, which could be relevant if you have done values work before, is thinking about values in terms of not only yourself, but the people around you.
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll get to it. So my first intentional time working with values was about 6 years ago, so around 2018. And my life looked very different from the start of 2018 than it did at the end of 2018. And I'll explain a little bit more about that here. And I think it was a few years before that, in like 2014, so several years, I got married. And shortly after that, I transitioned from working as a paralegal to starting my own business, the event planning business that I had mentioned just a bit ago. And everything seemed to be falling in place for the life that I wanted to create, including listening to the part of myself that was really listening to that entrepreneurial side of me. That was feeling like really in alignment with how I wanted to be. But yeah, I'd gotten married, I bought a house, I was building some community, I had a routine and a lifestyle that seemed really perfect, except that it wasn't. And I realized I wasn't living a life that was mine. Everything seemed perfect, especially on the outside. But I was creating something that I thought I was supposed to create and surrounding myself with people who weren't actually my people, and was ultimately getting to a point where, after years of my body trying to send me these signals telling me that something was not right, I finally started to listen. So there's quite a bit more to it than all of a sudden realizing that I was living a life that wasn't for me. This didn't happen in a moment. It happened gradually over a long period of time, until there was a moment when I knew that I had to do something different. So in about May of 2018 is whenever I separated from my husband at the time. And the weeks and months following that separation were, and filing for divorce and going through the divorce process, were incredibly painful and traumatic, and also really liberating. Um, I was in a process of breaking patterns and a lifestyle that did not serve me and that did not serve who I knew that I wanted to be in this world, which I'm still figuring out, but I knew that what I was doing was not for me. Um, and, again, while none of it happened overnight, I was slowly, incrementally learning how to make decisions that were serving me. Oh, thank you, Christina. I just saw your comment in the chat. But at that time, I was desperate to find tools, resources, and people who could hold space for me, people who could hold me accountable during that time because I needed that too, and also people who could love me as I was growing into myself because I was changing very rapidly in a very short period of time. Um, and, you know, whenever I packed my bags and left the house, in that moment, and of course it's like building, 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 but then you get to this moment and it's just like, okay, it's happening. This is what I'm doing. I'm leaving right now. Packed a bag and drove to a parking lot in downtown Evansville, which was where I was living at the time, where I'm from. And I realized that I'd spent so much energy on getting the courage to pack the bag and physically walk through the door that I hadn't put in a single thought into what would happen after that. And I
Mm.
think that was also to my benefit, was to not have thought too much about that because it's a lot. But I started to call friends and really anyone that I felt safe enough to listen to what I was going through in that moment. And I was grateful to be invited to someone's home for the weekend, so I had a place to stay. But the problem is that they weren't going to be home for about 4 hours. And so I'm sitting in this parking lot with a suitcase. I don't even think they were like a combination of things that were actually beneficial for me to use. So it's just like a bag of some of my things. But I found myself, without thinking, driving to Barnes and Noble, and the Barnes and Noble in town, so I could get a book. And I walked in, and having previously called Brene Brown's work a bunch of bullshit, I found myself, yeah, I know. I found myself just like instinctively going to her work. And I picked up Rising Strong, and it became my absolute guidebook to just getting through the next few weeks of my life, years of my life, I think. And it helped me not only to keep my ground, but also to maintain a loving perspective of the people who had been in my life that were quickly becoming a part of not being in my life. And that was really important to me, was to not go through that difficult process and start throwing blame or shame or any of that, which is really hard to do, especially when you feel hurt. And so that book really helped me kind of stay in a place that felt good to me. Kept me in my integrity. And I read it once, and then I read it, I don't know how many times after, several times. But the next several months they were grueling. And, same time I was developing, healthier relationships with the new people I was surrounding myself with. I stopped drinking alcohol. I started working out quite a bit more. I know Shauna is signing in right now. Welcome, Shauna. But and Shauna, I'll just give you a little recap real quick. I was talking about my experience with getting divorced and kind of what happened right after that. And I found myself at the bookstore buying one of Brene Brown's books. And in my former life, which Brian, this reminds me, I'd forgotten to say this earlier, but Brian was, I think he used the term former life yesterday in his talk, and that's something that Matt and I use a lot too. But in my former life, Brene Brown, I tried to read one of her books, and I, got through maybe a couple chapters of, I think it was Daring Greatly. And I was just, it was bullshit. It didn't apply to me. It just was not something that I was going to be interested in. The people around me agreed, and we drank our wine and we moved on. So fast forward, and I buy Rising Strong, and then later, as I'm going through this process of just starting to make these changes in my life, I was led to Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead. And so this is where the values come in. And the backstory is important because it wasn't like I just decided, hey, I'm going to look up values today, or hey, I'm just going to read this book today. Like, it was a series of events that kind of led me to this place. And I think that's important too. But Brene Brown introduced me to values, and she provided a list, which much of the list of her values is included in the list that we provided as well. But she provided this list, and the idea was to select 2 values. And these aren't values that you're using because, or that you're picking because you want to be that way, right? You're not picking words that just sound good when you say them to other people, which is what honestly we often do, is we pick values that we want people to think of us as. We want them to think of us as having integrity, or being family oriented, or being any of these things. But really what we're doing is picking values to help us make decisions and to serve as pillars in our life, in our day-to-day lives. And so after going through this deep process of self-discovery and defining my values, much of that process is still ongoing, as we talked about in Shauna's session. But Matt went through a process similar shortly thereafter, and we would meet for coffee and talk about this. And at that point, I was, and I think Matt was too, like, sharing this values list with absolutely anybody who would listen. So I'm asking friends and family, hey, look at this list, pick your 2 values, tell me why. And I was starting to see that when people told me their values, and most importantly, why they chose their values, I was starting to see them differently. And I was starting to understand, especially in hindsight, maybe how and why they made certain decisions in the past. I was starting to understand that, these values were in fact in alignment with them, even when they hadn't said them out loud, or whenever they hadn't spoken about them prior. And it was almost, I was starting to notice, like, the values were actually in their DNA. And I felt that way about mine too. So Matt and I, we started incorporating more of what we were reading and more of what we were learning in the self-help world into our own lives, and creating a process for ourselves, because and for me, I think it was, I didn't have the community of people around me to be able to go to and talk about these things. So it kind of felt like I had to do it myself. And so we started creating work for ourselves that we felt like we needed in our own life, and or our own individual lives, I should say. And we called this process Guided Discovery. And that is the foundation of all of the coaching that we do, and was the foundation of the first retreat that we did. And it all started with values. So at that time, this all, of course, led us each on our own individual paths. And Matt's story is his to share, but he, after that point, to experience going through divorce, and all the things that come along with going through divorce. And we were each on our own individual paths of heartbreak and suffering and clarity and growth and liberation. And for me, even to this day, more peace and love than I could have ever known possible in my former life. And so the last 6 years, I've been living through my values, and my life has been very different. And it's not just the values, but it's everything that has come as a result of just, starting that process. And I wanted to share with you all what my values are. And they are courage and self-discipline. So, and I've kind of fought with them over the years and wanted to change them, especially at times whenever I didn't feel maybe courageous, or I didn't feel like I was being disciplined enough. But whenever I let things settle, and I'm a little more clear, I know that those still are my values, and they incorporate so many other things. I know, and we might get to this a little bit later too, but even for me, there are so many other things that are important to me, like love is a big one. But I feel like love is wrapped up in courage and self-discipline for me. Like I'm able to love myself and to love other people whenever I'm courageous enough to let myself be loved, or courageous enough to love myself. And for a lot of people, that could maybe be the opposite. You maybe need to feel love before you feel like you can be courageous, but this is just I think the beautiful thing about values is it's all about your own individual experience and how you filter your life through your values and how you're using them. So for me, courage is what allowed me to look at my life honestly whenever I knew it wasn't working in my former life. And, this exploration of values is also a way to look at your own life in hindsight and how and why maybe you made some of the decisions that you did at times when your life looked very different, and maybe you didn't have as much compassion for yourself at that time as you could now. Um, but courage, it also, at that time, it allowed me to make a different choice, and it allowed me to continue down this path in life that does feel like it is for me. And it's also what's allowed me to be loved by the people around me, which is what I was sharing just a little bit about a second ago. My self-discipline, it helps me to keep the small promises that I make to myself every day, which in turn builds trust within myself. Every time I say I'm going to do this and then I do it, I build that trust. I also have to be disciplined enough and courageous enough to allow myself to change my mind at times when I say I'm going to do this, that maybe I don't actually need to do that thing. Maybe I need to do nothing. That's a big one for me. Um, but ultimately, it helps me in the smallest of moments make decisions in my life that nourish me and that allow me to be healthy, strong, and well, whatever that looks like for me in any given day. And being able to put language around my own personal values has given me a place to anchor to. It's been a guidepost to make decisions. It's been a place where I can look at my life with compassion. And, I'm sharing this here with you now, not because I've mastered this and because I'm always looking at myself with compassion or my past with compassion, because it's far from the truth. Just as we were talking about in the last session, it's just this like ongoing process. And, every time, one thing is tended to, that doesn't mean it can't come back, and it does, but I can revisit it, and I feel like I have the space to, maybe the capacity to, because of these values that I hold so true. So now we would like to go through our values workbook together. And if anybody has questions right now too, please let me know. You can raise your hand or type it in the chat. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the values list or do any of that, that is perfect. We'll bring that up here in a moment. And then really this exercise for all of you here now live, PS, thank you for being here live. Everyone who's listening after, this is meant for you to do with what you will, because it can take the time it takes. And for me, it took a while to select my values because I think I had a lot of resistance to it, and I wanted to pick the perfect things, and it just took a while for the two that were really for me to kind of emerge from the rest and to see how everything else fit within it. But for Matt, he was able to select his values almost instantaneously. So we'll kind of go through that together and see what happens.
Which is wild, because I said earlier when we were going through this that I'm a recovering perfectionist, but at the time I selected my values, I wasn't even in recovery yet. So and that's a real thing that just occurred to me as I was listening to you tell your story, is that like values, I see values as these sort of fixed points, these words, these concepts are these fixed points, but the way that we think about them can change based on our perspective. So we ultimately talk about values as something that you choose, or that you sort of, it's a combination of you choosing and they choose you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go into the worksheet, the workbook. But yeah, like there's no wrong way to choose a value. It's like, sometimes it takes forever, sometimes it doesn't, but they'll kind of speak to you. So,
And you
and
might call it bullshit and you might
yeah,
put it
yeah.
away for
Yeah. And I'll just say one other thing that maybe I wasn't planning on saying, but you were talking about Brene, and Brene's such a big deal for me. I had one of my biggest like epiphanies doing Brene Brown's shame work. And if you've never like done any of her shame work, but it was really connected to values because we were doing values and shame work sort of at the same time. And for me, I was doing the work. It was a way for me to be able to show up in community and be able to hold hard conversations or hard subjects. I was wanting to do, social justice work, and I was doing a lot of volunteer work, and I wanted to be able to go into the hardest of hard places and be able to hold it and keep it together and be there with it. So I was doing her work, and she asked a question that ultimately changed the whole trajectory of my values. And I'll get into that more. But the question is like, how does shame show up for you? And whenever I was thinking about how shame showed up for me, I couldn't answer the question. That I actually couldn't determine actually how I felt shame or how shame showed up in my life. I couldn't even determine whether I was feeling shame. And I struggled with it for a long, long time. And then ultimately, with the help of my community and Leslie, sort of like helping me, giving me space to figure this out, I realized the reason why I didn't think I experienced shame is because shame was the air that I breathed. And so it's like asking the fish where the water is. I've this is like, that was this. I mean, just saying it right now, I just flush with, with chills and heat, just still going back to that moment of realizing, oh shit, like now. And that was when I talk about that fixed point, it was just like I went, you know, and my values through that. And this is when I'll go into the process here in just a second. But through that, I maintained the same values, but they had completely different definitions, and it was just so clear. So I'll get into that a little bit here when we go through it. So I'm going to share my screen here, and once we do, maybe if we could get a thumbs up or two that we can see this. Yeah, okay,
that
awesome.
thumbs.
Okay, so this is the cover of our values workbook, and we're just gonna like go through it. It'll just be a fun little way to go through this thing and talk about how we do it. And you'll notice photos, and this is the only photo that's not labeled. But all the photos that we use in here, a lot of people maybe know the fact that Leslie and I live part-time mobily in a van, and we travel extensively, and it's part of what brings us alive. It's part of our true elemental nature. And so we put photos actually from our travels like all over the place in the backgrounds of all of our workbooks, just because we love it, and we hope everyone else loves it too. It's a little traveling experience. So this is our values workbook, and we define values as our core elements that we hold most important and work to live within every day. Okay. So we've got a quote from Brene here. We'll quote Brene, and living into our values means we do more than just profess our values. We practice them. We walk our talk. We're clear about what we believe and hold important, and we take care that our intentions, words, thoughts, and behaviors align with those beliefs. Okay, that's straight up from Dare to Lead. And we say in our own language that your values function as your elemental superpowers, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute, why we call them superpowers. They can work for you or against you based on how well you know yourself and understand how to use them in a way that supports your growth and success. And we always put success in parentheses, and it's not like a snarky way of looking at it. It's actually, we want to make sure and define success here. And it's what success means to you, what feels good to you, not some external definition of success, but what success looks like for you in this present moment. The life work contained in this workbook will give you the space and confidence to define, communicate, and live into your values and strengthen your core understanding of who you are and find out what brings you alive. And as Shauna said in her in her session right before ours, that the biggest danger to the world is people who don't know who they are. And so that's kind of like, I think, rooted in here. I've never like heard it that way before, but it's like this is all about taking those first steps of self understanding. We all know the word value and we know what we value, and it's just important to define those things. And it's the first small step. These are active guideposts that illuminate your purpose and provide clarity in all of your decision making that leads to joy, abundance, and fulfillment while living in your elemental nature. And we bring forward joy, abundance, and fulfillment, not because we think that people are going to live in joy, abundance, and fulfillment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but when we live in the world that we live in, that's full of negativity, and there's so many things that we want to try to center in our language, the things that draw people more to that neutral ground, that middle ground, away from just like the heaviness. So getting into value selection and definition. So Susan David wrote a great book on values, and you can look her up as well. But values are qualities of purposeful action that we can bring to many aspects of life. Above all, a value is something you can use. It helps you place your feet in the right direction as you journey through life, no matter where your life leads you. And this is important. I love that concept of pointing your feet in the right direction. And because actually the thing that happens after values in our guided discovery work is true north work, which is another really basic thing. But what values do, I think, really is set your feet on the ground and point them in the right direction so that you can more easily determine and more easily figure out like your trajectory and think about like where you're going and think about your purpose, right? And how you want to bring action into your life. So on the next page in here that we refer to on the following page is 230 values. Some of you may have seen this. It is a combination of Brene Brown's list plus our own research of looking for more values lists and adding, and then also in our work with clients and other people in our lives of doing this work, we've uncovered many other words, and we find that sometimes people make up their own word, which we highly recommend and encourage them to do, and then we add those to the list as well. So this is 230 and counting, as we continue to do this work. But you may find your values on this list immediately, or it may take days to decide. You may also not find a value that represents you on this list, so write in your own. The only rule is that you can only pick 2 for your final selection. And we encourage that you select and write in all values that resonate with you to create a short list and to start to consider which values may be contained within each other, which Leslie kind of talked to a little bit. Or which ones resonate with you more, which that's kind of a big deal, right? To follow your instincts, be creative. And when I say creative, I know I'm a creative professional, creative. Everyone is creative. And Christina, you mentioned genius earlier, and one of my absolute favorite definitions of genius is from David White, and it wouldn't be me talking unless I center David White. It's a poet, philosopher, David White, that genius is how everything is met in you. Okay, so just like let that sit for a minute, that everyone has a genius, the way the confluence of everything is met in an individual. And who we refer to in our lives as genius or creative genius are the ones that tap into that and are able to express it, right? That is a genius. Everyone is a genius, but what we refer to as a genius is someone who's able to express that authenticity. That's how we see it. And I find a lot of consolation in that. So that genius is going to be speaking to you when you're looking at this list, and it's going to be a conversation between you and the words, right? So we offer some consideration questions. Does this define me? Is this a filter I can use to make hard decisions? What kinds of relationships do I want to build? What kinds of activities make me feel most vital? What topics or situations do people seek my advice on? That's external, but it's also a mirror from people. And Larry talked about this in his conversation, is that this mirroring, that you should never live your life basically responding to everything people tell you about yourself, but how people are reflecting back to you is important to understand, what energy you're putting out there. And it's important to kind of take into consideration. So if people come to you for things, maybe that's telling you something. And am I at my best when operating through these values? And again, when we use best, that means best to you, what feels good to you. So it's really important to almost think about this values list, and we'll go there next if for anybody who hasn't seen it, and I'm sure you can read this really easily, get out your readers and your magnifying glass. But when you look at these words all have a charge. You know, you have a charge. You're going to be, you're going to have an energetic conversation with these words. For me, for whatever reason, even in my besieged former life, two words really stuck out to me. And I was so freaked out by the fact that they came out to me so quickly, and the fact that they both started with the same letter and the letter was A. I was starting to wonder whether or not I was having that situation where the first words that you see are the ones that stick to you. And I sort of like tried, as Larry said, I tried to like talk myself out of it and say these weren't it, but I kept coming back to him and kept coming back to him and kept coming back to him. So, and they are, for me, accountability and adaptability. Okay, those were mine. We usually like to do reveals, like we won't tell anybody what ours are until they say theirs. And we'll talk about that a little bit. If anybody wants to share their values, if they know their values, or if anything stood out to you. But that's really important to go through, and just when you read these words, say them out loud, read them out loud, or at least say them in your head and feel how they feel in your body. How does this word like make me, does it give me the chills? Does it produce heat in my body? Does it make my feet go numb? Do I feel nothing? Do you know, like all of it is, there's no right, wrong. It's just like, how does it feel? And I think that the words that will call to you, right? So then we recommend creating a short list, which we talked about originally. We created that space right here for you to write. I think I didn't have a short list. I just had the two. I think I maybe tried to force it and couldn't. It was just, those were the two for me. Leslie, I think you said you had like 10 or so, maybe.
So, yeah, and my method was like circling them on the list, so just circling and then color coding and going through that whole system until I could narrow it down. But this is another way that a lot of people have expressed is really helpful, is to go through the short list and then maybe start circling from the short list as
Yeah.
well, just to narrow it down. But again, it can, just depending on the person, can take, 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's really just dependent on each person.
Yeah. And you can reorder them. And this is the space really to think about which ones are contained within the other. Leslie did a really good job of explaining that in her process, that she was able to kind of say, well, this is, and one will rise, two will rise to the top, right? And so we've also found, I've found too, that in some ways, a lot of times we've done this process with quite a few people, and a lot of times, and I know for me, the values that emerge, which we put here, you'll select the two that emerge and you'll set them next to each other and just see them, like visually look at them sitting next to each other. And I've kind of found in some ways that one of the values that usually surfaces kind of feels external, and the other one feels internal. Sometimes there's like a conversation, like for me, like adaptability, feels a little bit external, and then I thought like accountability feels more sort of like internal. There was this sort of like, one had they both had different charges to me whenever I was looking at them, which was really interesting. They felt almost like there was a polarity there, which we'll get into a little bit more potentially later if we have the time. So then from here, we encourage writing your first value and then defining it, right? And we've had so many people do this in different ways. Me being kind of a rebel and someone who likes to make up my own way, I'll just sit down and start like writing my own definition of these things, like what it means to me. And then sometimes I like to check it down to the dictionary definition. I am kind of into that, but I usually start with my own feelings. We've had people like start with a definition. Some people don't have any clue how to define it, and we just say, just write about it. Just like what story tell, what does this mean to you, and how do you write like what it means to you? And then we get plenty of lines for that in the workbook. And then your second value, and you write that definition, right?
And this is the part, the defining it, I think, or saying why, that was for me what really stuck out for not only myself, but when talking to other people. And I'd kind of touched on that when I was talking earlier, but just more specifically, one person that really I like was able to see him totally differently was my dad. He shared his values whenever I asked him, and he fought me on picking 2 versus 3, and he wouldn't narrow it down, but I digressed on that. But one of them was humor. So it was humor and then knowledge and wisdom. He picked knowledge and wisdom, but humor was the one that really I was kind of like, because for me, when I looked at humor, I was thinking like, I don't know, that was like furthest on my selection. It just doesn't seem like a very strong word to me, right? And so I'm like, okay, Dad, why humor? I was genuinely curious. I wanted to know. Um and he just immediately was talking about how like, well, I think that humor can make people feel happy. And I want to, if I can, I want people to feel happy around me and I want them to be happy. And he was like, whenever, if you go to a funeral and I want to tell a joke and make them laugh and make them smile. And I think that can be debatable and like the timing and the place and if that'll work or not. And I know for me personally, it gave a lot of insight into maybe times when he had told jokes that seemed to me like maybe it wasn't the appropriate time, but for him I'm like, oh, whoa, he was not being insensitive. That was how he was loving that person in that moment. And even times in my life where I'd maybe come to him with, some heavy thoughts or feelings, or even like getting divorced and saying, like, I remember my dad kind of making light comments or jokes at those times, and it felt really hurtful to me. And I felt like I was being, like just not taken seriously, but to hear that his value is humor and he wants to make people happy and that's what he does. That was the part in hindsight. And even now, like even still, I can see it. Like even just recently we were with my dad and he said something and I was like, humor, am I right? Like, and it gives so much more context. And so that was kind of the importance in that. And, you know, I think that if you go through this process and select your own values and then select them with other people, the why, the definition, the personal definition is so important to get context on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the personal definition too, and this is part of maybe the storytelling for me and selecting values when I talk about that moment where I realized the shame was the air that I breathed, and it created a revolution in how I saw my values, that I could clearly see that. And this is where the superpowers come in, right? And this is what we were talking about. We call them superpowers because if we think about like the tale of the superhero, right? Like Spider-Man, when Spider-Man had just gotten bit by the spider and was getting all these, understanding these powers, had all these powers, but didn't know how to use them. He would hurt himself and hurt other people and damage things and destroy things. And it's like, because this power was so strong in them, what we value and what we hold dear at the core of us is so strong that if we don't understand what we're doing, we're hurting people. And when I realized that shame was that thing that was keeping me from really connecting to my values in a way that was healthy, I could see that what adaptability was for me was changing, being, and I'm so good at this, like just to survive, like reflecting another person's mannerisms, like in order to survive, in order to fawn, being able to uh change, everything about myself to fit in, like in a social situation. Like whenever I was in high school, I was in like every single group, and like I could be this and I could be that and I could be this and I could be that, and I was never really paying attention to myself. And whenever I realized that shame was the air that I breathed, and I could see that adaptability then could be used as a way. And I can talk about like my definition of adaptability after I learned what was holding me back. Was adaptability is being of openness and willingness to become the change I want to see in the world through listening deeply, asking questions, and a radical letting go of expectations. That leaning into discomfort of the emotionally unfamiliar and physically challenging while loving the transformation that emerges in me. And that's how I could use that, in a way that's healthy for me. And then just to quickly wrap up this, then accountability for me in my shame-induced life looked like falling on my sword, like taking accountability for everything in order to solve trying to control everything. If they're in my design studio, if I was working on a team of 5 people, if something went wrong, I took all the responsibility and blamed myself, thinking that I was the hero and that I was like fixing everything. And really what I was doing was denying everyone else any kind of culpability or any kind of ownership, right? I used to talk about that I used to had a leadership style that this epiphany brought, where was me standing in a doorway, yelling at everybody, going, come into the house, come into where we are, come into our space. And they can't get around me because I'm blocking the damn door while I'm telling everybody to come in. And so accountability for me then looks like creating safe and healthy boundaries that honor my physical and emotional and spiritual well-being in order to liberate anyone in my presence to do the same. It's identifying, internalizing, and communicating my needs clearly so I can sustainably communicate with others. And so it's me being accountable to myself and accountable to everyone else's humanity and freedom, right? So I just had like this complete 180, like doing all this work together. So like that's kind of like the power of values, that I was living into this exact same value, and I think creating a lot of havoc in my life, and then was able to like change all that. Yeah. So that's all about putting your values into action, right? Yeah.
And I just noticed we have about 9 minutes left here, so we can go ahead and stop.
We thought we were going to be short too, didn't we?
I know.
Okay. All right.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 of us, so
yeah.
And I saw Christina wrote in the comments, accountable and authentic and mindful. I feel like those are values that resonate with me, but damn, I have to narrow it down to 2.
Yeah. What were they again?
That's the challenge: accountable, authentic, and mindful.
Oh yeah.
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 So I was curious if like what is emerging for you all during the conversation, or if you have any experience working with values, if you have values that you've selected, or if you've looked at the list, what to resonate with you, or just anything else that kind of comes up.
Well, I've worked with values some before, but never to the point of 2 values that are pivotal in my life. And I started looking at this before we did, and I was marking different ones and stuff. And then I was sitting here talking to you, and I looked down and I saw trustworthiness and service. That seems to stick out. Now, whether they're mine or not, I don't know, but right now that seems to be what sticks out.
It's a beautiful place to start. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share? Oh, Eric, yeah.
I love the topic of values, and it's something that I use with clients as well. And I think one thing that's also helpful in addressing values, that's like come to me, is that sometimes I almost think it can be helpful to identify embodied values, like values that that are in action, like you guys are talking about. And so you have embodied values, and then you also have desired values.
Yeah.
And then noticing that there are a distinction between those two, of just reckoning within yourself that you do have currently embodied values that you're living out in the world, and also desired values that you want to progress towards.
Yeah.
I love the list.
Oh, thank you.
And this work, really cool. This workbook is awesome. What I've seen of it. So good.
Can we get that workbook?
I'm sorry, Margie.
Will they get the workbook? We hadn't talked about it, but we could upload it.
Yeah, we could. We usually do this as part of our like process and part of our coaching process, and getting access to the workbook as part of like the coaching process. But our values, we have got ideas on. We want to just give give this work away anyway, and that's like really what we want to do. And so yeah, we can post the workbook or some version of it that makes sense as a standalone. For sure. Yeah, we would love to share that.
Yeah. But what happens to me is my mind is so full of a lot of stuff right now.
Mhm.
And when we take breaks and stuff, I turn off. I
Mhm.
turn TV on for a while, or I do something else because I got to let everything sit and settle. And later on, I want to sit down and go through a lot of this stuff again at a slower pace.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
I would argue that that's actually really important to do that. I would argue it's important to let things marinate because things occur to us over time. So there's no pressure, rush, or expectation that you're supposed to like get any of this now, or like it's all supposed to click now. You know, I think there's something really valuable to the processing of everything. So I really liked your guys's emphasis on the definition part because more specifically to how is it playing out, I would like to spend more time with how it's actually how they are playing out in my life now, how they've played out in the past, like using them as points of reflection, like, oh, I can see where those values came in, like you were saying earlier, like it's in your DNA, like, oh, it suddenly gives context to why and how we made decisions the way we did and what they look like in our life now. So mine are freedom and creativity. Those are the two I've had for a very long time. I found them, I think I did this work, I don't know, it's been a while, but I'm pretty defensive of them. and
Yeah.
I think that they can have a dark side. And I think this would be an interesting analysis too, is like, what is the dark side of our values? How does that show up? And then how does it show up on the light side, right? And so I've seen, even just thinking about it in the here and now, like I can probably identify some ways that they were showing up on the dark side where I was just very vehemently defensive about my freedom. And I liked your idea too about one being practical and one being internal. I think you said something to that effect. Like I would say like there's an extroverted word and an introverted word. And I
Mhm.
think they're one. I think freedom and creativity for me could be one word, whatever that would be. And then the freedom side is like the internal and the creative is how it shows up. And
Yeah.
so in my space professionally, I can see how much these are playing a role in how I operate as a practitioner. I am very defensive of my freedom and creativity. I'm very defensive of my patient's freedom. And this can go into the other areas which of values, which is like autonomy and agency and intuition and knowing what is right for them and defending them to make their decisions on based on what's best for them and them knowing what that is. And, you know, me not playing the power card of the doctor, but rather encouraging you to be very clear about what feels right and what doesn't, right? So I'm very defensive of them in a very powerful way, I think in a good way in my practice, but I think it's really a valuable concept to consider. How are these showing up in ways that I'm actually being too rigid about them? Like maybe they're protecting me or I'm using them to protect things about myself that I'm afraid to let go of. Or yeah, I don't know. I think that's a really valuable space.
That's so
That makes
validating.
sense to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so validating to our process too, because workbook 3 we call polarities. And that's where we actually work through the first two and the positives and the negatives of the coming for, you know, like that's where we start to look at the dark and the light and the positive and the negative and the coming and going, the push pull. I could keep doing that for days. Yeah, but like, you know, of them happens in that. So that's really, yeah, that's actually my favorite part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shauna, I have to respond to something you said. You were talking about freedom being a core value. I've never thought about it the way you have, but you know, I'm a practitioner also, and I have lived my practitioner life with the idea I'm just a mentor. I cannot change them. They have to be free to do their own thing. And boy, that just really hit home when you said that, you know.
Mm.
Thank you, Margie.
Yeah, thank you all.
And I know,
Yeah, we're at 4:30 and Eric's up next. He's here, so we want to give him time to prepare.
yeah, so I guess we will go ahead and wrap up, but thank you all so much for being here. And something else Matt and I wanted to kind of share in this space. We haven't said it out loud to many people, but we've been kind of having this vision of bringing a group of people together to go through the guided discovery process. So we wanted to do like a beta group. So basically, if you or anyone that you know would maybe be interested in going through that process with us, we wanted to see what this process could be like going through it in community with one another. So just wanted to like put that out into the universe here and speak it out loud to other people. So thank you for receiving it, and to anyone who's listening to the recording as well. We'll, as that idea formulates, we'll be in touch. But if you have any interest in just hearing that it sparks something in you, let us know, and we can to have you on a list to let you know whenever we have something put together. And I think that's everything. Yeah,
I think we've covered it.
Yeah. So we have one final session with Eric in 30 minutes. Sean would be interested in them. Wonderful. I'll make a note.
Eric's bringing
And
down
you can put it to me also.
Margie, thank you. Cool. Yeah, well, 30 minutes. This is not, all of our other breaks have been like 15 minutes, it feels like. So this
do I have this
30 minutes will be
right?
nice. Yeah, 5 o'clock.
Oh, okay, cool.
30 minutes, 5 o'clock Central Time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Huh.
Well,
all right.
Thank you all.
Maybe we gave ourselves an extra 15 minutes since we were. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
That's funny.
we did.
Okay.
I know it happened.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, sending you all love. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in 30 minutes.
All right.
All
Thank you
right.
all.
Bye.
Thank you.